The rain had been relentless that evening in Atlanta, drumming against the glass facades of midtown high-rises and turning the streets into rivers of light reflecting red taillights and neon signage. Lila Monroe stood alone on the balcony of the penthouse she had once called home, her coat clinging to her pregnant frame, soaking her through as if the storm itself were mourning with her. 34 weeks along, she pressed a hand against her belly, feeling the subtle flutter of the life inside her, an innocent, unaware of the chaos her father had created in their lives. Her husband, Jackson Hale, had chosen that night to leave, not for business, not for obligation, but for the thrill of another woman. Serena Brooks, a dazzling socialite who dripped wealth and arrogance in every gesture. Jackson's Bentley disappeared down Peachtree Street, while Lila's world collapsed. Thunder punctuated the moment, as if the city itself were applauding his betrayal, mocking her helplessness. She had watched the taillights vanish, powerless, soaked, and abandoned. Yet, behind the veneer of heartbreak, a strategy had been quietly taking shape for years. Lila Monroe was not as powerless as Jackson or anyone else believed. Beneath the soft-spoken charm, beneath the smile she offered to clients and family, she was a strategist, an investor, a builder. For 7 years, she had quietly funded Jackson's ventures, keeping his empire afloat while he credited himself with genius and arrogance. All of it had been under a pseudonym, a network of shell corporations and offshore accounts that no one could trace. The name on the paperwork meant nothing to him, and that had been the beauty of it. She built the empire unnoticed while he strutted across boardrooms and galas believing he had clawed his way to success. Tonight, Lila wasn't thinking about revenge, not yet. She was thinking about presence, control, and the storm. Her mind flicked back to the early days, to the first time Jackson had proposed. They had met at an Atlanta charity gala, him charming, confident, dripping ambition, her careful, intelligent, and quietly discerning. He had confessed his financial struggles and hopes to her under crystal chandeliers, and she had agreed to marry him, captivated not just by his charm, but by his ambition, the same ambition that now left her standing alone in the rain. 7 years of silent labor, 7 years of building, 7 years of being invisible, had all led to this moment. She had not yet revealed her hand, but she would. Inside the penthouse, the walls still bore the echo of laughter, the smell of perfume and expensive wood finishing. It had been Jackson's empire too, or so he thought. But she had long understood the real architecture of power. She had designed, funded, and maintained it. And soon, he would learn it too. Yet, before confrontation could begin, she needed patience. Every movement, every revelation, had to land with surgical precision. The storm outside mirrored her mind. Chaos contained, energy building. When she finally stepped back inside, wrapping herself in a dry towel, she glanced at her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. The image was calculated, deliberate. The emerald green dress hugged her form not for vanity, but for symbolism. It was the color of wealth, of growth, of something rare and precious that had been cultivated over time. The choice was intentional. Jackson would see her at the family reunion, not broken, not pleading, not desperate, but present, commanding, impossible to ignore. The first few family members had begun arriving at the Hale estate in Buckhead. The foyer smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive candles, a curated display of taste meant to impress, intimidate, and reinforce status. Lila's mother-in-law, Vanessa Hale, was the first to notice her. With her signature mixture of aristocratic elegance and cold authority, Vanessa approached, pearls glinting beneath the chandelier. You're here alone?" Vanessa's voice carried across the polished floors, sharp, accusatory. Her eyes swept over Lila, narrowing as they landed on the visible curve of her belly. "Do you not understand what showing up like this, what it implies?" Lila kept her composure, her voice steady even as her heartbeat threatened to betray her. "I understand perfectly," she said softly, "and I'm here to witness exactly what choices you value in your family." The room stiffened, whispers rising from relatives who had been observing the interaction. It was a minor victory already, attention, subtle, and controlled. This was the first wave of the humiliation and anticipation she would orchestrate, not for cruelty, but for justice. And then Jackson arrived, his arm linked with Serena. every inch the man he believed himself to be. He didn't see the folder Lila held in her hand, tucked against her side like a weapon. The documents inside, loan approvals, corporate acquisitions, and the invisible web she had woven over years, were enough to collapse his empire in an instant if she chose to strike. But she would not strike immediately. That was the point. She allowed the shock to register on his face, noticed the flicker of confusion, the faint tightening of muscles he believed controlled every room he entered. He had been arrogant, unobservant, blind to the real source of power around him. Lila would teach him what it meant to misjudge someone, to ignore the quiet architect of your life while assuming you controlled the world. Every micro-movement mattered. Every pause, every step, every glance was part of the psychological scaffolding she had been building. Her presence alone was a statement. Jackson's carefully curated world was built on foundations he had never understood. The folder behind her hand was the final piece, evidence, authority, and the instrument of revelation. Outside, the rain continued, streaking the windows, reflecting neon from the city streets below, signaling the storm that was about to hit. Not just weather, but narrative, moral, and emotional. And for the first time in weeks, Lila Monroe smiled faintly. She wasn't the woman abandoned in the rain anymore. She was the woman who had planned, waited, and would now execute a revelation that would be remembered. The room, the storm, the lights, the anticipation, they all aligned. This was only the beginning. The Hale Estate's grand foyer was a cage of crystal and marble, each reflection, chandelier, and polished surface amplifying the tension as if the house itself were aware of the storm about to erupt. Guests had gathered in small clusters, champagne glasses glinting in the muted light, polite conversations faltering as all eyes repeatedly flicked toward Lila Monroe. The moment she arrived, alone, pregnant, and in emerald green, every whispered conversation became a pulse of anticipation. Jackson Hale's pride had been built on control over his business, his social image, even the perceptions of his family. Tonight, every ounce of that control would be tested, fractured, and laid bare. He walked through the doorway with Serena at his side, her laughter high-pitched, rehearsed, and artificial. She carried herself as if every step was a spotlighted performance, designed to draw attention and admiration. Jackson's face displayed the calculated neutrality of a man who believed he had rehearsed every scenario, every confrontation. Yet he had never rehearsed this one. Vanessa Hale, Jackson's mother, glided toward Lila with her familiar air of superiority, pearls shifting against her skin. "Lila," she began, voice sharp as a scalpel, "I don't understand why you are here. Surely you realize the implications of showing up like this, pregnant, alone, and defying every expectation of discretion." Lila's response was measured, deliberate. "I understand perfectly," she said softly, letting her tone carry across the polished marble floors. "And I came to see which of your values truly matter tonight, the ones you perform for appearances or the ones you practice in reality." The subtle dagger in her phrasing landed instantly. Murmurs rippled across the room. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward, sensing the tension but not yet understanding its full magnitude. The first of the micro-humiliation beats had been planted. Jackson froze for a fraction of a second, unnoticed by everyone except Lila. He had been trained to assume dominance, to command a room, to navigate social calculations. He had never anticipated true awareness and patience in the woman he had abandoned. Her presence alone destabilized him, subtly but irrevocably. The next movement mattered even more. Lila let her gaze sweep across the foyer, making deliberate eye contact with key witnesses, Jackson's younger siblings, business associates, and longtime family friends. Each glance carried silent confirmation. She was not weak, she was not begging, and she held the power they had assumed belonged solely to Jackson. "Jackson," she said finally, her voice soft but unmistakable, "you've built quite a life for yourself. But how much of it did you believe was yours alone?" Serena tilted her head, confused, not comprehending the undercurrent. Vanessa's lips tightened. Jackson's jaw stiffened. He had been blind to the invisible scaffolding that had supported him, the network of decisions, investments, and capital he had taken for granted, all quietly orchestrated by the woman he had abandoned. Lila's hand rested on the folder tucked at her side, almost instinctively. Inside were years of evidence. Corporate loans she had approved under a pseudonym, shell companies, quietly acquired properties, and strategic market moves that had kept Jackson afloat when his ventures were failing. All of it now positioned to reshape the power structure in this room. The tension stretched, deliberate and patient. Lila allowed it to build. She had learned that the anticipation of revelation amplifies emotional release more than the act itself. Jackson shifted slightly, a microbeat that revealed his unease. He had believed he understood every leverage point in the family, every whisper of influence. Tonight, he learned otherwise. A distant rumble of thunder punctuated the moment, drawing eyes to the rain streaking the tall windows. Symbolism mattered. The storm outside mirrored the emotional tempest inside. Lila's green dress glimmered under the chandelier light, each movement deliberate, controlled, but potent. She was both storm and calm. The invisible architect finally revealed. Vanessa's voice broke the silence again, this time edged with venom. Do you even understand the audacity of appearing here, in front of our family, after everything that happened? Lila's response was surgical. I understand more than you can imagine. And I am here to see which of you value truth over appearances, courage over performance, and character over status. The room collectively exhaled. The micro-humiliation of Vanessa, the subtle undermining of Jackson's carefully constructed authority, and the audience alignment, all mechanisms of emotional asymmetry, were now in motion. Viewers would feel a surge of satisfaction as Jackson's control slowly frayed. Jackson finally spoke, voice calm but brittle, a controlled mask cracking at the edges. Lila, you've made your presence known. But do you even understand the consequences of what you're implying? Lila let her hand slide subtly over the folder, not revealing the contents yet. I understand them better than anyone in this room, she said, letting the weight of anticipation sink in. But the consequences are yours to earn, not mine to deliver. The first layered suspense loop had been established. Jackson's power, his reputation, his public image, all in jeopardy. Lila controlled the timing of revelation. The audience, already emotionally invested, would now linger on every pause, every micro-expression, every nuanced interaction. At that precise moment, Jackson's sister, Tamara, stepped forward. Young, perceptive, ambitious, she had always questioned her brother's decisions quietly, observing the silent power dynamics he ignored. Her eyes flicked to Lila, then to the folder. What are you hiding? She asked, voice sharp enough to cut the tension like a scalpel. Lila smiled faintly. Nothing that cannot wait, she said. Every beat, every word, every glance orchestrated to maximize suspense, micro-humiliation, and inevitability signaling. The audience, your viewers, would now be locked into the dopamine loop, the storm, the betrayal, the withheld revelation, the moral contrast between protagonist and antagonist. The room felt smaller, denser. The guests, the family, Jackson himself, they were all characters in her narrative now, unaware of the truth that was poised to topple their assumptions. Outside, the rain intensified, splattering against the mansion windows, punctuating every whispered thought with the rhythm of an impending revelation. The rain had begun to taper in Atlanta, leaving the streets glistening under streetlights, reflections dancing on wet asphalt like fractured glass. Inside the Hale estate, the foyer's polished marble mirrored the rising tension, every sparkle amplifying the collective anxiety of the guests. Lila Monroe stood at the center, her emerald dress catching the light just so, a quiet storm in human form. Every micro-step she took, every measured pause, was calculated to extract maximum psychological impact from Jackson Hale, Serena Brooks, and the rest of the family. Jackson's confidence had faltered. He stood near the grand staircase, posture rigid, smile forced. Serena's eyes darted nervously, trying to project composure while her mind cataloged every subtle cue. The calm in Lila's stance, the slight flush in her cheeks that hinted at controlled anger, and the undeniable authority in her voice. For the first time in years, Jackson's carefully constructed world, the one built on arrogance and manipulation, was being threatened not by rivals, but by someone he had underestimated entirely. The woman he abandoned, pregnant, and yet unbroken. Lila let her gaze drift casually across the room, landing on Vanessa Hale. The matriarch's cold eyes widened imperceptibly at the sight of Lila's calm demeanor, pregnant belly proud and unhidden, and her subtle aura of controlled power. Vanessa had spent decades orchestrating family appearances, curating respect and obedience, but tonight, all her authority was subject to Lila's silent judgment. It was the first micro-humiliation beat, a calculated, emotionally asymmetrical move designed to establish dominance without a single raised voice. Lila's hand, tucked lightly over the folder she had carried like a talisman, was ready. It contained years of invisible labor, corporate acquisitions, discreet investments, loans she had approved under a pseudonym, all designed to keep Jackson afloat, to prop up his ego, while simultaneously giving her leverage she would now deploy. Each document was a tiny grenade of revelation, hidden until the right moment. And that moment, she knew, had begun to approach. Tamara Hale, Jackson's younger sister, leaned slightly toward her brother, curiosity and fear flickering across her face. "What is she doing here?" she whispered, voice low but cutting through the tension. Lila's eyes flicked to Tamara, a subtle acknowledgement of her perceptiveness. "Observing," Lila replied softly, letting the word hang. The micro-suspense loop tightened. What could Lila be planning? How much did she know? Each question compounded the tension, keeping the audience, your viewers, locked in, craving the reveal. Jackson finally broke the silence, voice steady but brittle. "Lila, whatever this is, I hope you understand the implications. There are ways to handle things without making a scene." The veneer of control was already cracking. He did not yet know the moral contrast echo that would come next, nor the inevitability signaling embedded in Lila's calm composure. She had orchestrated every pause, every glance, to ensure that the unfolding confrontation would maximize tension, highlight his arrogance, and drive emotional alignment with herself. Lila's next words cut the room like a blade, precise and controlled. "Implications are yours, Jackson, and tonight, every choice you've made will meet the consequences it deserves." Her voice carried the duality of calm authority and restrained power, a subtle embodiment of the delayed empathy principle. The audience now understood her internal suffering, but it would be revealed gradually to heighten engagement and retention. The foyer had become a chessboard. Every family member, every guest, was a piece in her meticulously crafted narrative. Jackson, the once dominant king, had no idea the queen on the board had been building a network of influence for years. Serena, once a confident pawn, began to feel the subtle threat of Lila's presence, sensing that her partner's foundations were shakier than she realized. Vanessa, frozen mid-step, was now forced into the audience identity lock. Even she could recognize the power of the woman she had dismissed and oppressed. Lila allowed the silence to stretch, each second a microdopamine spike. The storm outside had cleared, leaving a quiet punctuated by the drip of rain from eaves, echoing the slow, deliberate unfolding of psychological tension inside. And then, finally, she moved, a single step toward the staircase, a subtle micro-movement designed to draw eyes, attention, and anticipation. Jackson flinched imperceptibly, not yet ready to confront what he had ignored for so long. The fact that Lila had been the invisible scaffolding of his empire. The ballroom of the Hale estate had been transformed into a delicate tableau of opulence. Crystal chandeliers glimmered over polished oak floors. Velvet drapes absorbed the dampened echoes of arriving guests, and the soft hum of a string quartet attempted to maintain civility. Yet, civility was an illusion. Every eye in the room flicked toward the central figure. Lila Monroe, standing poised, emerald dress reflecting light like shards of strategy and patience. She was pregnant, but her presence exuded control and inevitability, a quiet storm after the literal storm outside. Jackson Hale had spent decades mastering the art of appearance, power, control, charm. But the truth was invisible, and tonight, it would be exposed. Lila had orchestrated her entrance like a master conductor, each step designed to elevate tension, create microdopamine spikes, and establish moral contrast. Every whisper in the room, every shift of weight on polished floors, worked to amplify audience asymmetry, the audience's alignment with Lila versus Jackson's ignorance and arrogance. Vanessa Hale, Jackson's mother, was already flustered, pearls trembling under her polished composure. "I don't know why you're here," she hissed. I don't understand why. Her words faltered under the weight of anticipation. Lila's eyes met hers with a calm precision that required no elevation of voice, only the strategic deployment of presence. Every second of silence worked like a slow burn. The tension multiplied, microclimaxes firing continuously, holding every viewer in the dopamine loop. Jackson shifted near the grand staircase, his arm instinctively brushing Serena's, seeking reassurance. But reassurance would not come. Not tonight. Lila's plan was not revenge and brute force, but surgical revelation, timed for maximum humiliation, moral contrast, and inevitability signaling. I assume you all remember, Lila began, voice smooth but cutting. The Hale family gala from 3 years ago, where Jackson's ventures nearly collapsed under his so-called genius. Her words landed like precise strikes, triggering reputation damage focus in Jackson, while subtly aligning the audience with her. Every family member and guest now recalled the event, his arrogance, the failures no one had publicly witnessed, the whispered criticisms. Jackson's lips parted. Lila, this is unnecessary, he said, voice tight, brittle. He had not yet realized the microlayering of humiliation about to unfold. Lila allowed a faint smile, a single nod to Tamara Hale, who leaned in slightly, hungry for the revelation. Audience identity lock ensured viewers were aligned with Tamara's curiosity and moral validation. Lila stepped closer to the center of the room, letting the reflective marble floors amplify her presence. With a subtle motion, she placed the folder on the polished table, opening it just enough to catch the chandelier's light on the first page. Jackson's eyes widened. His empire, what he had claimed as his alone, was now exposed as built upon her invisible foundation. Delayed empathy worked on the viewers here. They now grasped the enormity of her sacrifice and foresight, increasing emotional investment. You believed your success was self-made, Lila said softly, each word deliberate. Every venture you thought you mastered was quietly supported. Every loan, every acquisition, every salvaged deal. You didn't notice because you were too busy performing confidence and arrogance. Her voice carried across the room, punctuating micro-humiliation with moral contrast. The guests were mesmerized, some shifted uncomfortably, sensing the seismic shift in authority. Serena's grip on Jackson's arm faltered. The first cracks of panic appeared in her carefully constructed demeanor. She had assumed he was untouchable, but controlled cruelty and strategic revelation had already begun to undermine her confidence. Jackson's jaw tightened, beads of sweat forming despite the climate-controlled ballroom, emotional asymmetry in action. Lila's gaze swept the room once more. And for those of you who thought appearances were everything, she continued, subtly emphasizing the family and business observers, the foundation of power is not perception. It is action, patience, intelligence, and integrity. Something my husband here, her pause was deliberate, audience anticipation and suspense loop, has consistently underestimated. Gasps followed. Vanessa's face paled slightly, the first visible crack in her matriarchal armor. The audience, both characters and viewers, felt the weight of inevitability. Jackson's downfall was not only coming, it had already begun. Lila had set the stage with microclimaxes, delayed identity reveal, and narrative memory anchors. Every past failure Jackson had ignored was now reframed as evidence of misjudgment. Lila raised a single document from the folder, highlighting the morality clause embedded in a corporate agreement that Jackson had signed without scrutiny. 3 weeks ago, your decisions in disregard of basic obligations triggered consequences you didn't even anticipate. Consequences that I now control. The room held its collective breath. This was the first major public humiliation, executed with precision. Moral authority, financial leverage, and social exposure all converged. Jackson's face drained of color. You knew? He whispered, disbelief cracking through the veneer of authority. Lila's nod was almost imperceptible, yet devastating. Inevitability's signaling had landed. He realized he had walked into a trap crafted years ago with patience, intelligence, and invisible control. Tamara Hale's eyes sparkled with satisfaction. She understood the depth of Lila's orchestration. The audience, your viewers, would experience the same layered delight, rage release, satisfaction, and validation of moral justice. Every beat reinforced the dopamine ladder: stimulation, captivation, anticipation, and validation. Lila allowed a brief pause, letting every guest, every family member, every observer register the gravity. The storm outside may have subsided, but inside, tension and anticipation were at their peak. This was only the beginning. The next phase, Jackson's ego, public reputation, and perceived control would crumble further as Lila escalated humiliation, layered with moral contrasts and precise revelations, culminating in full audience catharsis. By the time she stepped back, adjusting her stance, the ballroom had transformed. Jackson was exposed, Serena was destabilized, Vanessa's authority had begun to fracture, and the audience was fully aligned with Lila's moral positioning. He was already experiencing reputation damage focus, the first stirrings of his public authority being questioned, long before Lila had even opened the folder. "Do you remember," Lila began, voice steady, "the first time I quietly supported one of your ventures?" She let her words linger, each syllable designed as a narrative memory anchor, a trigger for Jackson, Serena, and the room to recall past events that previously seemed insignificant but now carried monumental weight. "I kept your companies afloat while you believed you had built them alone. I carried the burden you thought you deserved credit for." Gasps rippled through the assembled crowd. Every nuance mattered: Jackson's tightening jaw, Serena's widened eyes, Vanessa's subtle retreat, and Tamara's slight forward lean, each micro-expression a testament to emotional asymmetry, controlled cruelty, and micro-humiliation. The tension loop had intensified. Jackson's lips parted, but no words came. Lila continued, letting the audience anticipate the next revelation. She spoke not with anger, but with the calculated precision of someone who had spent years delaying identity reveal to maximize impact. "Tonight, you will see what it means to underestimate someone you claim to love. You will learn the cost of arrogance and betrayal, not in whispers, not in rumors, but in evidence." Serena shifted uncomfortably, sensing that she had become a peripheral pawn in a game she had not yet comprehended. The microclimaxes escalated, every eye movement, every pause, every reflective surface, now amplifying the audience's emotional investment. Lila's strategy of perspective compression allowed every witness to process her power from their own frame of reference, deepening suspense and retention. Finally, she raised the folder slightly, just enough to catch the light from the chandelier. Jackson's eyes flicked to it, a flicker of genuine panic betraying him. What is that?" he asked, voice betraying the first crack in his confident facade. Lila's lips curved faintly. "Everything you thought you controlled," she said, letting silence follow, each heartbeat a drum of suspense, every second designed to escalate tension and retention. The stage was set. The first public micro-revelation had occurred. The audience now understood. Jackson's empire, his confidence, his family's perception of power, were all vulnerable. The next moves would escalate: strategic humiliation, full moral contrast, and the controlled dismantling of his perceived authority, all while Lila's secret identity loomed as the final, devastating revelation. The storm may have passed outside, but inside the Hale estate, the real tempest was just beginning. Every character, every observer, was now caught in the gravity of a truth that would shatter assumptions, upend social hierarchies, and demonstrate the ultimate power of patience, strategy, and revealed truth. Lila had taken control, and the game had only just begun. The Hale estate had gone quiet. The guests, still lingering from the sting of Lila Monroe's first public humiliation, now held their collective breath. Every reflection in the polished floors and mirrored walls seemed to stretch time, amplifying the tension that gripped the room. Lila stood near the center, her emerald dress luminous under the chandelier light, belly prominent and proud, a silent reminder of everything Jackson Hale had abandoned. Jackson had lost his composure entirely. His veneer of control, carefully cultivated over years, had cracked during Lila's precise verbal strikes. Serena, once brimming with superficial confidence, now clutched at his arm, her mask slipping. Vanessa Hale, usually the embodiment of authority, had become a hesitant observer, forced to reckon with the power she had dismissed and the cruelty she had allowed. Micro-humiliation beats, controlled cruelty, and audience alignment had been masterfully applied. Lila lifted the folder she had kept concealed, letting the first page catch the light. She began to speak, voice steady, precise, every word deliberate. Jackson, tonight is not about money. It is not about appearances. It is about truth. And the truth is, for 7 years, everything you believed you built alone was supported by me, by my investments, my capital, my strategic decisions. Gasps echoed through the room. Jackson's eyes widened. Disbelief etched across his face. Serena froze, realizing the enormity of the revelation. Vanessa's lips pressed tightly together, and Tamara Hale's jaw dropped slightly in admiration. This was emotional asymmetry at its peak. The audience aligned fully with Lila, witnessing Jackson's arrogance crumble under the weight of his own ignorance. You were arrogant, Jackson, Lila continued, pacing slowly, each movement calculated to punctuate suspense. You believed you were self-made. You believed your mistakes would never have consequences. You took me for granted, treated me as invisible, and abandoned your family for what you thought was passion, not realizing it was performance. But performance without substance, without strategy, without awareness, always fails. Jackson's hands clenched at his sides. The audience could see his internal panic rising, subtle micro-movements betraying the cracks in his confidence. This was reputation damage, focus, and inevitability signaling, applied in real time. Lila allowed silence to hang, each heartbeat intensifying anticipation, escalating dopamine, and reinforcing viewer retention. She gestured toward the folder. This folder contains every loan, every corporate acquisition, every financial move I made to support your ventures. Every single decision you thought reflected your genius was either my silent approval or my invisible funding. And tonight, it all comes into focus. This is the reality you chose to ignore. Jackson's face drained of color. You funded everything? His voice trembled, disbelief giving way to dawning comprehension. Yes, Lila replied calmly. And now you face the consequences of ignoring responsibility, of abandoning what truly mattered, your family, your promises, your integrity. Because consequences are not my invention. They are the natural result of your choices. The guests shifted, sensing the moral justice unfolding before them. Lila had orchestrated microclimaxes and suspense loops perfectly. Every family member, every associate, every observer was now fully invested. Every pause, every glance, every reflected light beam heightened anticipation. Jackson took a step back, trying to regain composure. This isn't fair. Lila's voice sharpened. Fair, she repeated. Fair would have been you honoring your commitments, valuing your family, understanding your partner as an equal. You abandoned us in the rain, Jackson. You walked away from your responsibilities. Fair is no longer the question. Truth and accountability are. She slowly laid the folder on the table, opening to the highlighted morality clause, the strategic contractual trap she had designed years ago. 3 weeks ago, you triggered this clause, she said, pointing toward the terms Jackson had signed carelessly. Abandoning your pregnant wife, ignoring obligations, believing love was your entitlement. You failed. And this clause, crafted not out of revenge, but out of logic and patience, gives me control of your last remaining assets. Every decision, every property, every leverage point you thought was untouchable now rests in my hands. The room went silent. Serena's hand fell from Jackson's arm, her confidence evaporating. Vanessa stepped back, pearls rattling, realizing her moral authority had been challenged and exposed. Tamara's eyes glinted with admiration, fully aligned with Lila's perspective. Audience proxy lines activated. Every viewer instinctively rooted for Lila, experiencing rage release and satisfaction simultaneously. Jackson's hands shook. You're destroying me. Lila shook her head. No, Jackson. I'm not destroying you. I am exposing the truth. I am revealing what your arrogance has created. You walked this path yourself. Every step, every miscalculation, every betrayal, it led here. I did not force you into failure. I only ensured the consequences reflected your choices. You are accountable. The first major moral crushing was complete. Jackson's public image, his ego, and the carefully curated illusion of control had collapsed before a room of witnesses. Every micro-expression, every shift of weight, Every reflective surface reinforced the dopamine ladder's validation phase. Viewers now felt the catharsis of justice fully delivered, yet still craving the ultimate revelation: Lila's secret trillionaire identity and the final restructuring of power. Lila took a step closer, hand brushing the folder, and spoke softly, almost conversationally, but every word precise. Tonight is not only about accountability. It is about transformation. You can remain the man who abandoned his family, who believed love and wealth were performance. Or you can begin the work of understanding what it means to rebuild yourself, to take responsibility, and perhaps to earn redemption. The choice is yours, but it is real, and it is unavoidable. Jackson's face registered a mix of shock, fear, and dawning comprehension. He was broken, not in body, not violently, but morally, socially, financially, and psychologically. Lila had executed controlled cruelty, moral contrast echo, absence as punishment, and narrative certainty bias with precision. Every character in the room, and every viewer, now understood the inevitability. Jackson's empire, his pride, and his social dominance were entirely contingent on Lila's hidden power, patience, and strategy. The storm outside had returned, light rain tapping the roof in soft percussion. It mirrored the quiet but unstoppable cascade of consequences Jackson now faced. Every witness felt the weight of end-state stability, the impact of choices measured against morality, strategy, and foresight. The audience, both in the room and watching from screens, felt invisible rewatch triggers at work. The subtle foreshadowing from past chapters now paid off in full emotional and narrative satisfaction. Lila Monroe stood tall, serene, and commanding, the moral and strategic victor in a room that had underestimated her for too long. Jackson Hale, once untouchable, was reduced to calculating fear and incredulity. The grand ballroom of the Hale estate had become a theater of consequences. Guests, frozen mid-step, whispered among themselves, yet dared not interrupt. Lila Monroe stood at the center, calm, commanding, and fully aware of the gravity in the room. The emerald of her dress shimmered under the chandelier's warm light, reflecting not just luxury but control, patience, and the quiet inevitability of her carefully orchestrated plan. Her hand rested lightly on the folder that had so far destabilized Jackson Hale and everyone who had ever underestimated her. Jackson's shoulders sagged slightly, his composure fractured entirely. Serena Brooks clutched at his arm, pale and realizing the empire she had thought untouchable was already slipping from their grasp. Vanessa Hale, whose pride had been meticulously curated over decades, now adjusted her stance subtly, aware that the matriarchal authority she had wielded was being questioned in the most public, controlled manner possible. Every micro-expression mattered. Emotional asymmetry, micro-humiliation, and audience proxy alignment were firing on all cylinders. Lila began speaking, her tone soft but precise, every word deliberate. Tonight, you've seen the consequences of arrogance, of betrayal, and of underestimating patience and intelligence. You've witnessed the collapse of appearances, the unraveling of illusions. But you've seen only part of the truth. A hush fell. The string quartet's notes faded into silence, the room's polished floors reflecting the intensity of the moment. Every guest leaned in, anticipating, holding their collective breath. Even Jackson's expression hardened with dread, sensing that whatever revelation was coming would eclipse every humiliation thus far. Lila lifted the folder fully, letting it open, and allowed a single page to catch the light. The audience, both in the room and watching, would feel the dopamine spike, anticipation, captivation, and validation converging simultaneously. I am not only the invisible architect who funded and stabilized Jackson's ventures, Lila continued, letting the words sink slowly into the room. I am the owner of Pinnacle Trust. Every investment, every acquisition, every financial foundation that sustained the empire you thought was yours alone was built by me. Today, I am revealing what you have been blind to. I am a trillionaire. The room gasped as if struck by lightning. Jackson's face turned pale, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. Serena's grasp on him faltered. She took a step back, realization dawning like a cold wave. Vanessa's pearls seemed to lose their luster, the matriarch frozen in disbelief. Tamara Hale's expression softened into awe. She recognized the brilliance and patience that had orchestrated this dramatic unveiling. Lila's voice, calm yet unwavering, carried further. Everything you believed you owned, everything you thought you controlled, rests on foundations you never saw. And tonight, every choice, every action, every betrayal you have committed is measured against the reality you ignored. She gestured to the assembled family and guests. Jackson, you have a choice. You can fight this, clinging to ego and arrogance, and face public ruin. Or you can accept accountability, work to rebuild trust and integrity, and perhaps learn what it means to be a partner, a father, and a man of character. The decision is yours. Jackson swallowed hard, his mind racing. The room itself seemed to hold its breath. He had been dismantled morally, financially, and socially, and now faced the stark reality. Lila had been building her own empire, unseen, unrecognized, untouchable. Every micro clue, every strategic pause, every subtle detail had been designed to amplify the impact. The audience, aligned with Lila's perspective, felt the ultimate catharsis. Every prior micro-humiliation, every suspense loop, every moral contrast now paid off. Viewers experienced rage release, emotional satisfaction, and validation in one layered moment. Jackson's fall was complete not through violence, but through consequence, precision, and morality. The bloodless destruction that this niche craves. Lila then turned her gaze to Serena, who had attempted to manipulate and charm her way into Jackson's life. And you, Lila said softly, will understand that manipulation, greed, and superficiality hold no power when patience, intelligence, and moral clarity are applied with precision. Serena's composure faltered, the micro-humiliation echoing loudly in her mind as the audience experienced controlled cruelty and moral contrast firsthand. Vanessa Hale finally found her voice. Lila, you've done what no one else could imagine. I've done what was necessary, Lila replied, her voice calm, serene, yet unyielding. Not for revenge alone, but to reveal the truth, enforce accountability, and restore balance. This is the power of patience, foresight, and moral clarity. Outside, Atlanta's streets glistened under the rain's aftermath, the city lights reflecting the storm that had passed. But inside, a new storm had been orchestrated. Finally, Lila placed the folder down, letting the weight of her presence linger. The room had shifted irreversibly. Jackson's empire, his public image, and his self-perceived dominance were gone. Serena's illusion of status had dissolved. Vanessa's control had been undermined. Tamara, and every observer, now understood the depth of strategy, patience, and moral justice. Lila Monroe, pregnant, radiant, and in control, had turned abandonment, betrayal, and underestimation into the ultimate demonstration of power and precision. The narrative was complete. Justice had been served, moral lessons had been internalized, and audience satisfaction had peaked. Every viewer, both in the room and watching, now craved more, not just for the story itself, but for the anticipation of her next move, her next revelation, and the promise of seeing arrogance meet its match again. The storm had passed, but Lila's triumph, layered, complex, and masterfully orchestrated, would echo far longer than the night itself.